They say there are 7 levels of betrayal. But let me tell you, honey, there's only one that matters. The one that happens when you look across a table at your own blood and realize they see you as nothing but the villain in their sad story. I didn't think I'd ever be standing in a courthouse, looking at my sister. My own flesh and blood, my Aunt Shine, the woman my mama named Ora Mae's older sister. But here we were, 2 grown women, fighting over a shadow of a life. I was there for the simple fact that my sister, Shine, claimed I, Ora Mae, had stolen her life. Not a car, not a winning lottery ticket, not her husband, no, she claimed I stole her entire life. Piece by piece, opportunity by opportunity, for the last 50 years, and that the house I gifted her, the very roof over her head, was nothing more than a guilty admission of my crime. Now that, my friends, is a hook you don't forget. Shine was sniffling, loud enough for the bailiff to shift uncomfortably. I felt Marcus, my eldest, standing just behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder, a gesture of support that felt more like a restraint. He was trying to keep me calm, but my blood was already boiling like oil in a fryer. I was looking at a woman who had been bitter her entire adult life. And I realized then, sitting in that cold room, that her bitterness was just her way of staying warm. Then came the first real warning sign, a quiet whisper that should have been a siren. The lawyer, sharp as a tack and clearly enjoying the drama, started his monologue, throwing out words like undue influence, fraudulent transfer, and emotional duress. But then he dropped the real bomb. He said, "Your Honor, Mrs. Shine's entire life was dictated by the decisions of the plaintiff, Ora Mae, who knowingly and intentionally deprived my client of the inheritance and opportunities that were rightfully hers. And this house, this so-called gift, was merely an attempt to silence the truth." The words hung there, smelling like old resentment and cheap manipulation. I could feel Marcus tense up behind me. "Hold it, Mom," his hand seemed to say. "Don't give them the show." But I wanted to give them the show. I wanted to stand up and shout, "I was the one who kept your sorry self out of jail. I was the one who paid your rent when your schemes failed. I was the one who gave you the keys to a house you never earned." But I was silent, because that's what a good narrator does. We save the truth for the audience, not the enemy. This fight wasn't about the house, which, by the way, was fully paid off and worth a good chunk of change. This fight was about Shine's narrative. She needed to believe that someone else was responsible for her messy life. And who better than her younger sister, the one who always seemed to land on her feet, the one who married well, the one who raised good children? She needed me to be the thief so she could be the victim. The stolen life part, that's where the true cinema lies. See, our parents, God rest their souls, were hard-working but simple folk. They didn't have much, but they had a solid piece of land that had been in the family for generations. And when Mama and Daddy passed, they left a bit of confusion in their wake, nothing malicious, just a poorly written will that basically left the final decision on the property to the wisest and most stable sibling. Guess who that was? Yeah, me. Not because I was smarter, but because I was boring. I paid my bills on time, I kept my mouth shut, and I had a husband. God bless Robert, who was a rock. Shine, on the other hand, well, Shine was a hurricane in a floral dress. She chased schemes, married 3 times, once to a man who literally vanished with her savings, and lived her life like a soap opera without the commercial breaks. Her lawyer, Dr. Finch, was droning on about how I had leveraged my financial stability to control the destiny of my sister. He painted a picture where I was the puppet master and Shine was the poor, helpless marionette, dancing to my financial tune. And the more he talked, the more ridiculous it became. And the more dangerous it felt, because I realized the court could actually believe this fantasy. I felt the urge to laugh, a dry, humorless sound that would have gotten me kicked out. This man, this corporate vulture, was trying to convince a judge that a grown woman, a woman who had spent 40 years making her own bad decisions, was somehow my victim. And the best part? She had the audacity to act like she believed it too. Her whole body language was screaming, "I deserve better, and Ora Mae owes me." You know, sometimes you just have to look at someone and say, "Bless your heart. You really believe the lies you tell yourself, don't you?" Shine lived in a world where everything she lacked was someone else's fault. And this court case, this public shaming, was her final, desperate attempt to cash in on her victimhood. It wasn't about justice, honey. It was about revenge for a life she felt had been promised to her. A life I had somehow stolen just by living mine right. My lawyer, a sharp, quiet man named Mr. Thompson, finally spoke, his voice low but firm, cutting through the lawyer's dramatic flourish. Your Honor, we have documents. Receipts, a documented history of financial generosity that utterly refutes the claim of a stolen life. My client didn't steal a life. She saved one time and time again, and the house in question was a gift, freely given, with a clear deed. He paused, then delivered his punchline. The problem, Your Honor, is that my client's sister doesn't hate her for taking something. She hates her for having something she wanted. The air got cold. Shine's face, usually masked by that theatrical distress, went completely still. It was the face of a true predator caught in a lie. I saw the pure, unadulterated hatred she had kept bottled up for years, now finally spilled out onto the floor of that courtroom. It was a terrifying thing, seeing that much poison directed at you. That's when I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. A tiny moment from our childhood that suddenly made all this chaos make perfect sense. It was the summer of 1968, and Mama had bought us matching dresses. Yellow with little white flowers. Shine, being the elder, got the one with the better neckline. But when we went to church, everyone said, "Oh, little Ora Mae, that yellow just makes your eyes shine." Shine went into the bathroom and cut the lace off her own dress, saying it looked cheap anyway. I was terrified then. Now standing here, I knew the pattern. If she couldn't have the thing, she had to destroy it. Or at least convince herself and the world that it was ugly. But the lawyer, Dr. Finch, he wasn't done yet. He knew he had to recover from that truth bomb. He shifted gears, becoming softer, more menacing. Mrs. May, if you were so stable, so generous, so loving, why did you wait until your sister was at her lowest point, facing eviction, before you gifted her this house? He turned the timing of my own good deed into a weapon. Wasn't it a calculated move to gain leverage, to make her feel beholden to you? Leverage, I wanted to scream. I did it because I was tired of the phone calls. I was tired of watching my sister drift from one disaster to the next. I did it because I was trying to honor my mama's memory and keep the last remaining piece of our family, my sister, from sleeping in her car. But again I was silent, because a woman scorned is dangerous, but a sister scorned, especially one fueled by decades of envy, is a force of nature you just have to weather. I looked at the judge, a kind-faced woman who looked utterly exhausted by the family drama. I saw in her eyes that she wasn't just hearing a legal case. She was hearing a lifetime of unresolved family trauma. This wasn't about law. It was about grief disguised as greed. And if you're still with me, if your heart is aching for that younger me who just wanted to buy her peace with brick and mortar, you're going to want to hear this part. Because the truth about how that house actually came to be, and what really happened to the inheritance, that's the part that will make your jaw drop. Hey, subscribe if true stories about family betrayal and hard-won peace really move you. Shine, sensing the pause, leaned over and hissed across the table. Not to me, but to the air in between us. You always thought you were better than me. Ora Mae, always. Mama should have left the land to me. I would have done something important with it. That was the key. The land. The land that Mama and Daddy left to the wisest and most stable. Shine didn't want the house I gave her, not really. She wanted the power I had to make the decisions. She wanted the reputation I had built that made me the responsible one. She wanted the life where people looked up to her instead of pitying her. I finally looked her right in the eye, and for the first time, I didn't see hatred. I saw deep, deep sadness. I saw a woman who had spent 50 years looking over my fence, watching my life, instead of tending to her own garden. It was heartbreaking, truly. But sadness doesn't pay my legal fees, and it certainly doesn't erase the damage her lies were causing. Mr. Thompson, my lawyer, gathered his papers, a small, knowing smile on his face. He knew we had the truth, but we needed to bring the receipts, literally. He told me, "Mrs. May, this is a fishing expedition. They're hoping you'll slip up or that the emotional pressure will make you settle. We won't settle. We're going to show the court the exact timeline of your generosity and her self-destruction." As we were leaving the courtroom, walking through the throng of lawyers and other miserable souls, Shine rushed past me, knocking my shoulder with an intentional force that jarred me. She stopped, turned, and looked at me with that chilling smile, the same one she wore after she cut the lace off her yellow dress all those years ago. She leaned in, close enough for me to smell that cheap floral perfume she always wore, and she whispered the line that burned into my memory and became the title of this very story, the line that confirmed everything. "You can keep your gift house, Ora Mae, but I'm going to make sure the world knows you're a fake. You stole my life, and that debt is never paid." I stood there, looking at my sister, the woman I had tried to save my whole life, and I realized I had not stolen her life. I had simply refused to let her steal mine. I was finally ready to fight her, not with kindness, but with hard, cold facts. I had to walk away from that courtroom, look Marcus in the eye, and tell him, "Son, get me every last receipt, every canceled check, every phone record. I'm going to end this." The question was, did I have enough proof, enough strength, and enough courage to tell the world the truth about the missing inheritance, the truth I had carried silently for decades, the secret that would either set me free or bury me completely? I was about to find out. I understand, continuing the story with Section 2, backstory and hidden tension, adhering to all previous instructions. No visual descriptions, no headings, strictly conversational tone, and maintaining the high retention pacing. The truth about the missing inheritance, the one that made Shine believe I stole her whole life. Well, that truth starts not in a courthouse, but with a promise made on a porch swing 40 years ago. See, when Mama and Daddy died within 6 months of each other, that's when the instability really hit. We weren't rich, but they owned the land free and clear. That small plot with the 2 houses on it. One was the main family house, solid and comfortable, and the other was a smaller rental unit out back. Shine, she was already grown, married for the 2nd time, and living what she called a life of high potential, which was a fancy way of saying she was flat broke and juggling bill collectors. I was the younger one, the responsible one, the boring one, married to Robert, who had a steady job at the mill. Robert, he was the only reason I was considered the wisest and most stable sibling in that messy will. That hurt Shine deep, I know it did, because she always saw herself as the one with the spirit, the one destined for something big. The first few years after the funeral, everything was quiet but tense. Shine kept coming to me with these investment opportunities. It was always a hot stock tip from a guy she met, or a multi-level marketing scheme selling things nobody needed. And every single time, I'd have to use my small reserve to bail her out, keep her from losing her car, or help her pay the children's school fees. Not my children, but her children from her first husband. I did it because I was the only one who could. I did it out of love, but also out of fear of what she'd do if she hit rock bottom. Then came the first real warning sign, a quiet whisper that should have been a siren. Shine needed a big chunk of money, something like $7,000. To secure a property deal she swore would make her a millionaire. She swore on Mama's grave it was a sure thing. I didn't have that kind of cash liquid, but I did have the title to the rental house, the smaller one out back. It was paid for. I went to Robert and he looked at me, bless his calm soul, and he said, "Ora Mae, we cannot be responsible for her fantasies. If she wants to play the high-stakes game, she has to use her own chips." But I couldn't let it go. I was scared if I didn't give her this, she'd resent me forever. And I was foolish enough to think $7,000 was a cheap price for family peace. So I took out a small equity loan on that rental house, enough to cover her investment. She lost every penny of it in less than 6 weeks. That property deal? It was a scam artist she met in a church parking lot. She came to my kitchen, not crying, not sorry, but angry. She looked me right in the eye and said, "You didn't give me the money fast enough. Ora Mae, you made me look weak. If you really loved me, you would have had it ready for me. Not, 'I'm sorry I lost your money.' But you failed me." That was the moment I realized her envy wasn't just about what I had. It was about believing I was actively holding her back. The debt, the money I had to pay back on that little loan, I hid it from Robert for almost a year. That's how deep the manipulation went. She didn't just hurt her life. She almost broke the trust in my marriage. But the inheritance, that's where the true poison was poured. See, that second house, the rental property, was always meant for Shine in the event that she ever settled down and needed stability. It was an unofficial verbal promise Mama had made. But when Mama passed and Shine was on husband number 3, And already proven herself financially volatile, Robert and I decided to hold the title to both properties, just on paper, to protect the whole estate until Shine proved she was capable. It was a fiduciary decision, a practical move to save the family land. We told Shine that the main house was mine, and the rental unit was jointly owned, and we'd figure it out later. That was the first lie, born of good intentions. The truth was I legally held both, but only to prevent her from burning them down for insurance money. Figuratively speaking, that little lie, that little piece of paper, became the evidence she used to claim I had stolen her entire life's potential. She saw me, the younger sister, taking control of the land, and that confirmed every insecurity she ever had. The tension just simmered after that. It was never a shout, it was a cold, passive-aggressive silence. Every time I bought a new dress, she'd ask if it was a good investment. Every time I talked about my children's college plans, she'd sigh about how she had to pull her kids out of the private school she deserved to send them to. Every moment of my peace was a silent accusation against her failure. The years passed, and my life, I won't lie, it got better. My husband got a promotion, my children, Marcus and Joylene, they were thriving. But every time I felt a true moment of happiness, my heart would clench. Thinking about Shine out there, struggling alone. It was the guilt, that heavy, dark coat she had managed to drape over my shoulders. I realized I couldn't live like that anymore. I couldn't be happy in my own home knowing that my sister saw it as a throne. I had illegally usurped, so 3 years ago I decided to end it. I decided to give her the ultimate olive branch. The only thing she seemed to value more than anything else, property. The main house was too complicated, too much history. But the rental house, the one I had taken a loan on for her and paid off, that was the key. I renovated it top to bottom. It was small, but it was pristine, comfortable, and hers. No rent, no mortgage, just the taxes. I thought, this is it, Ora Mae. This is the act of love that will finally settle her soul. She will have her own roof, her own piece of the legacy, and the resentment will finally melt away. I went to my lawyer, got the deed transferred, clean and simple, making sure it was recorded as an unconditional gift. No strings, no future claims. Just here, sister, peace be with you. I was so proud of myself, so full of relief, thinking I had finally bought my freedom from her judgment. I drove to her rundown apartment, the one she was about to be evicted from, and I had the keys and the new deed in my hand. I remember the air was crisp. The sky was a perfect blue, and I felt lighter than I had in years. I pictured her face lighting up. Tears of gratitude, a real hug, a genuine apology for the past. She opened the door, and she looked tired, so tired, with those dark circles under her eyes, like my Joylene looks now when she's been working double shifts. And for a split second, I saw my sister again, the one who taught me how to braid my hair and how to whistle. That's why I did it, you see, for that woman, not for the poisonous mess she'd become. I handed her the keys and the legal papers. I said, Shine, it's yours. The house. It's paid for, clean deed. Go home, sister. Go finally build your life. She looked down at the keys, then back up at me. And that's when the second, deeper betrayal happened, the one that broke my heart even more than the lawyer's accusation. Her face didn't light up with joy. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion and contempt. The very second I gave her what she wanted, she realized she couldn't hate me for keeping it anymore. She couldn't blame me. She said, her voice dripping with poison, Why, Ora Mae? Why now? Did your conscience finally get to you? Are you paying me off for what you know you did? I felt the blood drain from my face. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't relief she felt. It was confirmation of her victim status. She didn't see a gift of love. She saw hush money. I had given her her house, and she still saw me as a thief. It wasn't the house she wanted. It was the guilt she needed me to carry. I tried to reason with her. I said, Shine, please. It's just a gift. I love you. I want you to be safe. But the damage was done. She took the keys, but she didn't touch me. She didn't thank me. She just gave me a look that said, You thought a house could make up for stealing my destiny? Think again. Oh, honey, that moment, standing in front of her dingy apartment, realizing that my sacrifice was utterly meaningless to her, that I had traded a house for a poisoned olive branch. That's when I knew the fight was never going to end. If you're still with me, because your own heart knows this kind of deep, unforgivable family pain, you're about to hear the part that led us straight back to that courtroom. And trust me, The reason she waited to accuse me is even more calculated. If true stories about the complicated debts we owe to family move you, then honey, consider subscribing to Tales of Ora Mae. I walked away that day, defeated but clear-eyed. I knew I hadn't bought peace. I had just changed the battleground. I thought the house would make her stop asking for money, but instead, it made her feel entitled to everything else. She settled into the house, but the phone calls didn't stop. Now they were for the new refrigerator she deserved, the landscaping she was owed, the property tax money that was my responsibility because I was the one who stole the property in the first place. And then she found it. The thing that brought us to that judge's bench. The final piece of evidence she needed to solidify her fantasy of being the wronged sister. She was cleaning out the attic of the small house, digging through some old boxes Mama had left behind, boxes I hadn't been through because I was too busy paying the bills for 2 households. And she found a letter. A simple, handwritten letter tucked inside Mama's old Bible. It was dated a year before Mama died. The letter was a personal note from Mama to me, essentially an emotional codicil to the messy will. It said, very clearly, that she was leaving the family silver and the antique tea set to me, Ora Mae, because Shine had already taken her portion years earlier to pay off one of her many gambling debts. Mama had kept it quiet, not wanting to shame Shine. That letter, it didn't just mention the silver. It also mentioned the exact amount of cash Shine had already received, money that was essentially her share of the savings, and it totaled almost the entire liquid inheritance, money that was long gone by the time the will was read. That was the true missing inheritance, the one that was supposed to make us equal. Shine had squandered it decades ago, and Mama had covered for her. When Shine read that letter, she didn't see proof of Mama's love and discretion. She saw proof of my collusion. She saw the letter as a fraudulent attempt to cover up the fact that I had engineered her early, smaller payout and kept the rest for myself. She didn't realize she had already spent her portion. All she saw was Ora Mae's name and the phrase already taken her portion. The phone call I got after she found that letter, it wasn't a cry for help or a request for money. It was a roar of pure, unbridled fury. You lied, Ora Mae. You and Mama, you conspired against me. You made me look like the fool who had nothing, while you kept the silver and the whole legacy. That house isn't a gift, it's blood money. I finally saw the truth of her pain, but I also saw the impossibility of ever healing it. It wasn't about the money. It was about saving face. She had spent 50 years telling the world she was robbed, and that letter, while proving my innocence, cemented her belief that I was the ultimate betrayer. I had to face the music. I had to stop running. I hung up the phone, and I knew the rules had changed. This wasn't about a house anymore. It was about my reputation and my moral standing in the family. I was done being the silent victim, the responsible one who always cleaned up the mess. I picked up the phone, not to call her, but to call Mr. Thompson, my lawyer, and I asked him to prepare the documents to officially divide the entire family property, not just the house, and to get a restraining order. Because this war was no longer about love. It was about total emotional survival. I told you I was done being the silent victim, and I meant it. When I called Mr. Thompson and explained about Mama's letter, the one Shine saw as proof of a conspiracy, he didn't even sound surprised. He just sighed and said, "Mrs. Mae, this is exactly what happens when you try to protect someone from the consequences of their own choices. They weaponize your silence." He told me to sit tight, to not answer the phone, and to absolutely, under no circumstances, go near Shine's house. But you know me. I listen to reason right up until my heart tells me I have one more thing to say. I knew if I let the lawyer handle it, it would just be paper shuffling. This was a family wound, and it needed a surgical intervention, face to face, even if it meant risking my own peace. I had to confront her, not about the house, but about the lie she was living. I had to tell her the real story of the missing inheritance to her face. I went to her house, the one I gave her, the one she called blood money. It was late afternoon, the sun already setting, casting long, dark shadows across the porch. I didn't use the key she still hadn't returned. I knocked, and I knocked hard. I knew she was inside because her little sedan, the one always running on fumes, was parked right by the curb. She finally yanked the door open, and she looked like a fire ready to burn. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from pure, raw, adrenaline-fueled anger. She was wearing a faded, stained sweatshirt, looking penniless, but carrying herself with the false dignity of a queen betrayed. She held Mama's letter clutched in her hand like it was the 10 Commandments. "What do you want, Ora Mae?" She spat, her voice low and dangerous. "Did you come to gloat? To see how the poor, foolish sister is coping now that she knows the truth?" I didn't step back. I stood my ground on the porch. "I came to tell you the truth you refuse to see. Shine, you found that letter, and you twisted it into another reason to hate me. You have lived your whole life looking for a villain. And I'm tired of wearing the mask." That was the emotional explosion. The release valve that had been building for decades. She started screaming, truly screaming, using words I hadn't heard since we were children fighting over a doll. "You're a liar! You and Mama, you stole my future. That money, that cash portion, it was mine, and you used your stability, your high and mighty reputation, to convince Mama to give it all to you." She shook the letter in the air. "It says right here you already took your portion." That was the cover story. I took a deep breath, letting her venom wash over me, trying to separate the rage from the pain underneath. I looked her in the eye and said, "Shine, the letter doesn't say I took my portion. It says you took yours, decades ago." She stopped short, her mouth hanging open. The silence, that long, drawn-out silence, was the loudest thing I've ever heard. For one split second, I saw a flicker of doubt, a momentary crack in her fortress of self-pity, but she slammed it shut almost immediately. "That's another lie, Ora Mae. I never touched Mama's savings. I never took my portion. I was struggling for years." "Yes, you were struggling," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "because you took your portion in 1985, and you blew it all on that ridiculous pyramid scheme with that man, husband number 2, the one who left you stranded in Arizona. Remember? Mama paid it off, she paid him off, and she swore to you she'd never tell Daddy or me to save you the shame. That was your inheritance, Shine. You just spent it 30 years ago." The color drained completely from her face. It was a complete reversal of power. I wasn't accusing her anymore. I was recalling a shared, shameful past that she had completely erased from her own mind, or at least buried so deep she no longer felt responsible for it. "That's impossible," she whispered, shaking her head furiously. "That was a loan, a personal debt. Mama would never. She wouldn't do that without telling me the truth." "She did it because she loved you," I countered, my voice cracking slightly with the truth of Mama's sacrifice. "She did it because she wanted to give you a clean start. One last chance to save yourself. But when the time came to write the will, she knew she couldn't leave the rest of the liquid savings to you, because she knew you'd lose it again. She left the silver and the tea set to me, because she knew I'd keep them. And one day, if you ever came to your senses, I could give them back to you." That was the twist, the secret I had been guarding. Mama didn't leave the silver to me because I was the favorite. She left it to me because I was the safe deposit box. And when I told Shine that, her rage didn't subside. It simply morphed into something colder and more terrifying. Unadulterated resentment of being protected. "So you admit it," she hissed. "You admit you were given the power, the control? You took my dignity. You made me dependent on you for 30 years, thinking I was too foolish to handle my own money." She ripped the door open wider, revealing the cluttered, yet cozy living room I had paid for. "I don't need your protection, Ora Mae. I needed my freedom, and you stole it from me every time you decided you knew better." I looked past her into the living room, and that's when I saw Joylene's picture. A framed photo from her nursing school graduation, tucked onto a shelf amongst Shine's collection of ceramic cats. My middle daughter, the one who was a straight shooter, the one who carried all the emotional exhaustion of working double shifts to serve others. I realized then that Shine's envy extended beyond money. It was about my children, too. Children who hadn't married scammers or ended up in jail. Children who were stable, loved, and successful. That sight, the picture of my daughter mixed up in her emotional chaos, gave me the final surge of pure parental resolve. I was done trying to save the sister who didn't want saving. I had to protect my own legacy, my own peace, and the reputation I had built for my children. "You never wanted freedom, Shine," I said, my voice suddenly clear and without emotion. "You wanted an excuse. The moment you had to face your own choices, you went searching for a scapegoat and you found me. I gave you this house, A piece of land your husband number 3 tried to get you evicted from, and you still managed to turn it into a weapon. I reached into my purse not for a gift, but for a letter I had prepared with Mr. Thompson. I held it out to her. This is from my lawyer. It's a formal notice that I will be filing a claim to partition the entire family estate, including the land that holds this house. Since you've decided to drag this through court and claim conspiracy, we will let the court decide who is the true beneficiary of Mama and Daddy's love and trust. She didn't take the letter. Her anger suddenly evaporated, replaced by the terror of a woman who had just realized she bit off more than she could chew. She wasn't used to me fighting back with legal paperwork. She was used to me fighting back with pity and canceled checks. Partition? She stammered, her voice shaking now. Ora Mae, you wouldn't. This is my home now. You gave it to me. You can't just take it back. That moment, when the reality of her legal situation hit her harder than any emotional truth I could offer, that's when I knew I was doing the right thing. Because some people only understand the language of consequence. If you're following this emotional roller coaster and you recognize how a small lie can become a lifetime of family war, then please take a moment. If true stories about standing up for yourself and reclaiming your peace resonate with you, subscribe to Tales of Ora Mae. I gave it to you as a gift, Shine, I said, and you immediately called it fraud and blood money. When you claim fraud, you void the contract. You know that, don't you? You declared war in that courtroom, sister. And I'm going to make sure that when the smoke clears, the only thing you have to blame is your own pride and bitterness. I placed the lawyer's letter on the small table next to the door, right next to Joylene's picture. You have 24 hours to call your lawyer and tell him to drop the ridiculous claim of a stolen life. If you don't, Mr. Thompson will proceed with the petition. And trust me, Shine, when a judge sees Mama's letter, your old gambling debts, and the clean deed to this house, the only person who will lose everything is the one who cried wolf. She lunged for the letter, clutching it to her chest, her eyes wide with panic. The tears came then, real ones this time, the ugly, desperate kind. Ora Mae, please, we're sisters. Don't do this to me. I only said those things because I was hurt. You know how I get when I'm hurt. I can't lose this house. Where will I go? It was the ultimate emotional blackmail, the exact move I had been running from for 50 years. The sound of her real distress almost broke me. Almost. I had to remember what she had done in that courtroom, how she had involved my son, how she was willing to lie under oath to destroy my reputation and legacy. You should have thought about where you would go when you stood in front of that judge and called me a thief, I said, my voice sounding older, wearier, but ultimately resolved. You made your choice, Shine. You chose victimhood over gratitude. You chose hatred over family. Now you have to live with the consequences. I took one last look at my sister, seeing the tragedy she had manufactured for herself, and I turned my back on the little house. I started walking away, not fast, but with deliberate steps, letting the silence settle between us. Ora Mae! She screamed after me, her voice echoing in the neighborhood. I hate you! You will be alone! You will pay for this! I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I simply nodded to myself, a quiet acknowledgement that the sister I once knew was truly gone. I had given her the house, and she still chose hate. There was nothing left to give. I needed an ally, someone who understood the weight of a quiet, stable life. I needed to see Mr. Harmon, the neighbor with the gentle smile and the calm demeanor. I needed a moment of genuine, honest, non-transactional kindness to cleanse the poison. I walked toward my car, the sound of my sister's rage fading behind me, knowing that the confrontation was done, the truth was out, and I was about to embark on the hardest chapter, the reckoning where I had to watch my sister legally self-destruct, and I knew, deep down, that she was going to bring one of my children, my quiet, guilt-driven Marcus, right down with her. I left that house, left my sister screaming my name, and I didn't look back. That walk to the car felt like I was shedding 40 years of obligation. But it was heavy, too, a different kind of heavy. It was the weight of knowing I had just severed a bond that Mama and Daddy thought was unbreakable. I drove straight home, but my peace was short-lived. The next morning, the legal fallout hit like a tidal wave. Mr. Thompson called. "Mrs. May, your sister's lawyer responded to the partition notice. They're not dropping the claim. In fact, they're doubling down." My stomach dropped. I knew Shine was stubborn, but this was beyond pride. This was self-destruction. They're filing a preliminary injunction to prevent the partition, claiming that the house was not an unconditional gift, but a promise of inheritance that was later revoked in bad faith. "But Mr. Thompson," I said, "we have the deed." "It says gift," he sighed. That heavy lawyer sigh that means you're in for a long, expensive battle. "They're not relying on the deed, Mrs. May. They're relying on testimony. And they found someone who claims to corroborate Shine's story about the stolen life and the revoked promise." I frowned, confused. Who else was close enough to our family to lie on the stand for Shine? Her children wouldn't dare. Her husbands were long gone. "Who, Mr. Thompson? Who is it?" He paused, and his next words felt like a stab wound. "It's your son, Mrs. May, Marcus Jerome." I sat down hard on my kitchen chair. Not Marcus, not my eldest son, the one who was standing right behind me in the courtroom, the one who had his hand on my shoulder, the one I had just confided in. I felt a cold dread that went deeper than the betrayal from my sister. Shine's lies were based on envy. But Marcus's involvement, that had to be based on guilt or manipulation. I immediately thought of Tacia Rose, my daughter-in-law, the one with the polished look and the cold, judgmental eyes. She had always been financially calculating, always watching the purse strings. I called Marcus immediately. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight, distant, the voice of a man already drowning. "Mom, before you say anything, I can explain." "Explain what, son?" I kept my voice level, not wanting to scare him off. But the ice around my heart was thickening. "Explain why your aunt's lawyer just named you as a key witness to testify against your own mother? To support a lie that I stole her life?" He stammered, his usual smooth, controlled demeanor completely shattered. "It's complicated, Mom. Shine. She told me that when you gave her the house, you mentioned it was supposed to be her share of the family's assets, that you were just dividing the inheritance early. She said you admitted you felt guilty for keeping the main house all these years." I couldn't believe the level of manipulation. Shine had twisted my act of love, my desperation to buy peace, into a confession of a crime. Did I use the word inheritance, Marcus? Or did I use the word gift? He was silent. I knew the truth. But Shine had worked on his emotional core, his sense of filial duty and that hidden guilt that he carries. "It's Tacia, isn't it?" I asked, cutting to the chase. "Did she pressure you to get involved? Does she see this partition as a way to secure her future portion of the main house by making Shine look like a martyr?" I heard a faint, high-pitched voice in the background, likely Tacia, telling him to put the phone on mute. I realized this was my moment to turn the tables, not just legally, but morally. I needed to separate the truth from the lies, not just for the judge, but for Marcus. "Marcus, I need you to come to my house. Bring Tacia. Bring the truth. Don't hide behind a lawyer. Come look me in the eye." They arrived an hour later, Marcus with his conflicted, guilt-ridden expression, and Tacia wearing a modern, expensive, earth-toned outfit, her arms crossed defensively. She was all poise and calculation. I sat them down at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once counted pennies to help Shine. "Let's talk about the stolen life," I began, my voice clear and authoritative like a judge myself. I looked at Tacia. "Tacia, I know you are concerned about your family's future, but you will not use my sister's mental illness to fuel your financial ambitions. This is not your inheritance to fight over." Tacia tried to interrupt. "Ora Mae, we're just trying to make sure the family legacy is—" I cut her off instantly. "The family legacy is built on truth, young lady, not manipulation." I turned back to Marcus, speaking directly to his long-held sense of fairness. "Marcus, your aunt lost her inheritance because she gambled it away 40 years ago. Mama covered for her. I have the receipts. I have Mama's letter. I have records of every dime I've given Shine for the last 50 years. This house was a gift to save her from eviction, not a confession of guilt." I took a folder and slid it across the table. It contained photocopies of the old bank statements, Mama's discreet payout to settle the gambling debt, and the clean, final deed recording the house as an unconditional gift to Shine 3 years ago. "Your aunt is trying to destroy me, and she's using your own guilt against you, Marcus. Look at this, and tell me again that I stole her life." Marcus reached for the documents, his hands trembling. Tacia leaned in, scrutinizing the dates and numbers. As Marcus read the details of the 1985 payout, the true missing inheritance, his composure crumbled. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a combination of shame and dawning realization. He finally saw the depth of his aunt's manipulation and the extent of my sacrifice. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. "I didn't know. Shine never mentioned this. She only told me you got everything and felt bad about it." He covered his face with his hands. "She didn't tell you because it doesn't fit her narrative, son," I said gently, allowing myself a moment of maternal softness. "She needs to be the victim. But you are not going to be her weapon. You're my son, Marcus. I need you to choose between the lie that benefits Taisha's ambitions and your aunt's victimhood, and the truth that protects our legacy and my peace." Tacia, seeing the plan falling apart, intervened, her voice rising with panic. "Marcus, don't be manipulated. She's just trying to turn you against your family. This is about assets." I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting, the end of the confrontation. "No, Tacia. This is about dignity. Marcus, I need you to call your aunt's lawyer within the hour and tell them that you will not be testifying. If you choose to testify for your aunt, supporting her lie, then I will have to proceed with the full legal case against your aunt, and I will be using those same documents to show the judge that the entire family has been financially manipulated for decades." It was a clean, direct threat, but it was aimed at saving my son, not destroying him. I knew Marcus's deepest fear was public shame and the exposure of his family. The thought of a judge dissecting decades of family debt and drama was enough to break through Tacia's control and his own guilt. I had put the decision and the moral power squarely in Marcus's hands. It was terrifying watching my son struggle to choose between the comfort of his wife's ambitions and the hard truth of his mother's sacrifice. If this moment of reckoning and the hard choices we have to make for our children move you, you won't want to miss the ending. And if you appreciate real stories of mothers fighting for their peace, please consider subscribing to Tales of Ora Mae. Marcus finally stood up, his face pale but resolute. He looked directly at Tacia, then back at me. "I won't testify against you, Mom. The truth is the truth." Tacia gasped, her carefully constructed composure finally breaking. The look she shot me, a cold fury mixed with defeat, was as final as a slamming door. They left soon after, arguing quietly in the driveway. I sat in the silence, exhausted but victorious. The threat was neutralized. My son, the one I feared was lost to manipulation, had been brought back to the light by the simple power of documented truth. But the war with Shine was not over. Now it was just her lawyer, and her self-pity against my facts. I picked up the phone and called a friend, but not just any friend. I called Mr. Harmon, my neighbor, the one with the salt and pepper beard and the gentle smile. He had seen the conflict in my driveway, the tension of Marcus and Tacia's hurried departure. He answered warmly. "Ora Mae, I was about to call you. I saw your son's car leave in a hurry. You doing okay over there?" His voice was like balm to my tired soul, a non-judgmental presence in the middle of my family's chaos. "I'm better than okay, Mr. Harmon," I confessed, letting out a long, shaky breath. "I just won a very painful battle, and I need a moment of peace to remember what kindness feels like." I asked him simply if he would mind walking with me to the community garden at dusk. It was a request for connection, not assistance, and his quick, easy, "Be right there, Ora Mae," was the greatest reward I could have received. My reckoning wasn't just about destroying my sister's lies. It was about rebuilding my own life with people who saw me, truly saw me, as a person deserving of peace, not as a resource to be exploited. I had taken the steps to reclaim my dignity, and the next step was to embrace the quiet joy I had always postponed for the sake of family obligation. I put on a soft cardigan, something comfortable, and walked out my front door to meet Mr. Harmon. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. As I stood there, watching him approach, his hat tipped slightly, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. I knew the final victory wasn't going to be won in a court of law. It was going to be won right here, in my own life, in my own decision to choose joy over obligation. I had stopped the lies, reclaimed my son, and found a moment of genuine connection, but I still had to face the judge, who was waiting to rule on the validity of the original will, a ruling that would either make my peace permanent or force me to watch my sister drag my parents' name through the mud one last time. I was about to find out if Mama's final judgment, the one about the wisest and most stable sibling, would stand up in a modern court of law. The final victory, I told you, wasn't going to be won in a court of law, but the law had one last word to say before I could truly claim my peace. After my confrontation with Shine, and after Marcus backed out of testifying, my sister's case fell apart like a cheap suit in the rain. Her lawyer, Dr. Finch, tried to argue that Mama's original will was too vague, that the phrase wisest and most stable sibling was discriminatory. But Mr. Thompson, my quiet, steady lawyer, he just smiled. He presented the documents, the proof of the 1985 payout, the evidence of Shine's squandered inheritance, the pristine deed for the house she was given, and Marcus's official retraction. He argued that the court shouldn't be asked to relitigate 5 decades of poor life choices dressed up as a stolen destiny. The judge, the same kind-faced woman from the first day, didn't need much deliberation. She ruled swiftly and decisively. She upheld the original will, affirming my legal right to the main house and the disposition of the family assets. She ruled that the house I gifted Shine was just that, an unconditional gift and not part of the inheritance dispute. Then she added a final line that I felt deep in my soul. She said, "The plaintiff's case appears to be fueled not by financial injury, but by deep-seated familial resentment, which this court has no power to resolve." I won. I won the house, I kept the property, and most importantly, I kept my dignity and my truth. Shine's lawyer filed an immediate appeal to try and stall the process, but the judge had already given me the final moral victory. I walked out of that courthouse, not with relief, but with quiet, hard-won peace. That night, I sat down with Mr. Thompson to finalize the paperwork, to make my peace legal and permanent. I looked over the documents, and I made a final, decisive move. Since Shine had forced the partition, I went ahead and divided the entire estate in my new will. I formalized the split, ensuring that the legal battle was over and that my children would never have to deal with her claim to the family land again. But I didn't cut her out completely. I placed the house I had gifted her, the very roof over her head, into a trust, ensuring she could live there for the rest of her natural life. But she could never sell it, borrow against it, or use it as collateral for one of her schemes. When she passed, the house would revert to my children, the family legacy secured. It was a final act of tough love and ultimate protection, a way to give her stability without giving her control. It was the first time in my life I felt truly free of her drama, free of that guilt I'd carried since childhood. I didn't hear from Shine after the ruling, not a word. The silence wasn't vengeful, it was final. She was forced to live in the house she called blood money, accepting the stability I provided while forever carrying the shame of her public failure. But the most important change was in me. I was no longer the woman who traded her peace for validation. I started living the life I had postponed. I finally met Mr. Harmon for that walk in the community garden, the evening after the ruling. The setting sun cast that beautiful, golden light, not harsh like the courtroom, but soft and warm. We didn't talk about lawyers or sisters or stolen lives. We talked about planting roses, about the smell of rain on dry ground, and about his grandson, Caleb, the quiet youngest son, who was studying engineering and came by to help with his yard work. We talked about small, simple, true things. He saw me, Ora Mae, the woman who loved a quiet life, not Ora Mae, the family ATM or the reluctant matriarch. He stopped by a small, colorful flower patch, looked at the wildflowers and then at me. "Ora Mae," he said, his voice gentle and low, "you look like a woman who finally took her first deep breath in 40 years. I'm proud of you for choosing you." His kindness, that genuine, uncomplicated kindness, was a healing balm stronger than any legal victory. I finally realized that the life Shine accused me of stealing was the life I had simply chosen. The path of responsibility, stability, and quiet hard work. She mistook my discipline for destiny, and her own self-destruction for my intentional malice. And I had been foolish enough to let her believe it, hoping my pity would somehow soothe her rage. I let go of the anger, the guilt, the decades of quiet obligation. I focused on my children, especially Marcus, who was now communicating with me openly and honestly, having learned a tough lesson about manipulation. Joylene came over, and we sat on the porch sipping tea, just two women talking about life, not about bills or betrayal. The atmosphere in my house was light, finally breathable. The most important lesson I learned in that courtroom was that you can't save someone who is determined to drown, and you definitely can't pay off a moral debt with financial means. The house didn't buy my peace. The courage to say no did. The gift wasn't the house. The gift was the mirror I held up to my sister, forcing her to look at her own reflection. I sit here now, years later, watching the sun come up over the quiet neighborhood, and I realize the truth of it all. You can be the most stable person, the most generous person, but if someone is determined to see you as the villain, you will be the villain. Your only power is to refuse to play the role. You save yourself, you protect your peace, and you let the consequences fall where they may. Because, honey, my mama taught me that the only life you are truly responsible for is the one you were given. I tell real stories like this one, about the hard truths we face and the complicated family bonds we carry. If you want to hear more tales of courage, consequence, and hard-won peace, subscribe to Tales of Ora Mae. Now I want to ask you, my friend, the one who walked this long road with me, if you knew a gift of generosity would be twisted into an accusation of guilt, would you still give the house to your sister, or would you simply let her face the eviction? What would you do in my place?